Hello, Highgate Wood School. Thank you for having me. If you hear background noise during this video, it's because I share this room with my two pet guinea pigs and they occasionally make noise when I'm trying to be on Zoom calls or record videos. My name is Joe Wells. I'm an autistic comedian and writer. I've performed on BBC Two, I've opened for people like Frankie Boyle, and I've had stand-up clips get millions of views online. It's Autism Awareness Day in April, and if I'm honest, I've never really understood Autism Awareness Day. I feel like everyone is already aware of autism. Also, I don't want people to just be aware of autism. I want people to understand and value and include autistic people. And I realise this might sound like I'm being picky, but the way that we talk about this stuff matters. If we talk about autism as a thing we should be aware of, we're using the same language which we use for diseases which we want to get rid of. I know that sounds dramatic, but there are still lots of people who do see autism as a disease, and those people are wrong and they do a lot of harm. So I think we should change Autism Awareness Day and instead call it Autistic Person Understanding and Valuing Day, which admittedly isn't as catchy, but that's the cause that I can get behind. So what does it mean when a person is autistic? That might be too big a question to answer in the time I have. The problem with definitions is they never work for everyone. There's a saying in the autistic community: if you've met one autistic person, then you've met one autistic person. And basically what that means is there's so much diversity from one autistic person to another that you can't really understand what it means to be autistic until you've met all of us, and that would take ages. It's also true that the definition of autistic has changed drastically over the years and will probably change again in the future, so any rigid definitions I give might be wrong by the time you leave school. People talk about the autism spectrum, but even that's not always helpful because it implies that you could line people up from least autistic to most autistic and everyone would have their point on that line, and the reality is actually much more complicated than that. And also, I'm not qualified to give an absolute definition of what it means to be autistic, but what I can do is I can tell you about what being autistic means to me and what it might mean for many autistic people. It might mean that our senses work in a different way to most people. We could sense sound, light, taste, texture, smells even more strongly or less strongly than most people. And in some situations this can be a problem for people, so bright lights or noisy school corridors can be really overwhelming. But in other situations it can be a real strength. I want to show you this book by Dara McAnulty, which I'd really recommend for your school library. It's called Diary of a Young Naturalist. And in the book he talks about how his heightened autistic senses give him a deeper connection with the natural world and they make him a better nature writer. Another aspect of being autistic might be being quite rigid in the way you think. Again, whether or not this is a good thing can be based on the situation you're in. I find changing travel plans really stressful, which can be difficult when you're a comedian and gigs get changed around on the weekends. But on the flip side, autistic people who think rigidly make incredible activists because they never compromise on their ideals or values. Greta Thunberg, who led the school climate strike, is the obvious example of this. But also Lydia Brown, who campaigns for disability rights, is maybe less well known, but they do some incredibly important activism. Some aspects of social communication can be difficult for autistic people. I know I find it really difficult when I'm talking to someone to pick up on the very subtle hints that people give about how they feel. This is one of the reasons I do stand-up comedy. In a comedy club, it's very clear how people feel about you. If they laugh, it means they like you. If they clap, it means they really like you. And if they boo, then you know you've said something wrong. And one thing I think is important to say, though, is that difficulty picking up on how people feel from their body language and things like that is different to not caring how people feel. I care deeply about how my friends feel, and when they're having a difficult time, I want to help them. I just don't always realise they're upset if they don't come out and tell me. I also think it's worth saying that non-autistic people can sometimes be really bad at picking up on subtle cues too, particularly when people hide how they feel. And autistic people will often get criticised for being too direct about things. I think it's particularly true for autistic girls because of the social expectations put on women and girls. But I think this directness about how we feel is actually a much better way to be. It's much healthier. In the long term, it stops way more upset than it causes. It's common for autistic people to have intense special interests. Growing up, I had a special interest in comedy, and I still do. I would talk about comedy all the time. I spend all my money on comedy DVDs and shows. And here's my advice for autistic people with a special interest. Don't listen when people tell you that you have to have a broad range of interests. Instead, work out a way you can get people to pay you for your special interest. Whether it's trains or comic books or makeup or hip-hop music, there will be a way that you can make a career out of that special interest. And if you have that autistic focus on that interest, you will have such an advantage over everyone else in that industry. That special interest I had as a teenager, and I'd annoy people talking about it, is now my main source of income, and I'm so lucky that I wasn't forced to be more broad in my interests. There's many more aspects of what it means to be autistic. I can't explain what it means to be autistic in one video. I think I'm already running longer than I meant to. But I also want to talk to you about going to school and how I became a comedian. But if there's some great resources out there if you want to find out more about what it means to be autistic. This book by Megan Rhiannon called Existing Autistic, I would really recommend if you can get a copy for your library. There's also a brilliant YouTuber called Yo Sam De Sam who makes hours and hours of incredible videos about what it means to be autistic. So as an adult, I've got a really nice life now. I do a job I like, I'm married to someone I love, I've got good friends, but it was a long journey to get here. I didn't enjoy school. I did quite well in exams, but I'd struggle in loads of other areas, especially making friends. I think at school there was this idea that ability was just one spectrum, and I now realise this isn't the case at all. People can be really good at some things and struggle with other things. And also people can struggle with something at school, not because they're not good at it, but because they're in an environment where they can't concentrate properly. So it's really important that the school environment works for everyone. Also, I think that sometimes subjects at school can be taught in a way which doesn't work for everyone. I didn't do that well in English at school, but I now make money as a writer. I think a big part of that reason I struggled in English lessons at school was the way that I was taught didn't work for me as an autistic child. I'd urge everyone to put pressure on your school leaders to make sure that Autistic Person Understanding and Valuing Day, which is what I'm now calling it, goes beyond just one day. It needs to go throughout the school, throughout the year. There should be space on your curriculum to learn about important autistic people from history, like Alan Turing or Henry Cavendish. There should also be space in your curriculum for autistic people to pursue their special interests. Even the food on offer in your school canteen, there should be choices which work for autistic pupils whose sensitivity to certain tastes or textures are different to other pupils. Including autistic people only works when everyone plays their role. It should be a whole school thing, including pupils. You'll notice that I say autistic pupils rather than pupils with autism, and a lot of people think that saying person with autism is more politically correct, but actually most autistic people prefer the term autistic people. And the reason for this is when we talk about someone having autism, it sounds like something that they are bringing into school which they need to learn to manage or treat. When we talk about autistic people or autistic pupils in a school, it makes it part of a person and puts the responsibility on the school to be more inclusive. That's quite a radical way of looking at it because we're so used to talking about autism as a problem which people have to overcome. But I've met lots of really successful autistic people and none of them have overcome being autistic. They've overcome prejudice and they've navigated their way through environments which don't work for them, but they're just as autistic as they have ever been. If you as a school are serious about everyone succeeding, then you all need to work all year round to challenge prejudice and make sure that your school is an environment which works for everyone. I'm sorry this hasn't been very funny. I promise you that I am a real comedian. I have a stand-up clip I wanted to share with you. It has some PG-rated language, so I'm hoping your schools won't be squares about including it. The routine went viral and had over 1 million views, so if you don't find it funny, then you are wrong. The point I wanted to make with the routine is that we always need to challenge what we think normal is. And I think the question when someone's behaving in a certain way or responding to a situation in an unusual way, the question that you can ask yourself is this person, the way they're acting, a bad thing, or is it just different to what I think is normal? And I think if you keep asking that question, then that will help you to create a school that is better for autistic people. I hope you enjoy the clip.